All right, let's go ahead and get started. I think we see quite a few people here in the webinar. Thank you for joining us. This is our kickoff of our holiday safety campaign. It's the webinar that we want to start a whole month of great resource sharing and information, but I won't steal the thunder on that, and I'll be sure to toss it over to our moderator, our co-moderator, for a bit more information there. But in the meantime, my name is Kelly Roberson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Alcohol Policy. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the center, our primary mission is education, which is education of regulators, legislators, and the public about alcohol, both its uniqueness and its regulation. So one of the ways in which we accomplish this mission is by hosting webinars such as this one. And we've had quite a few webinars over the course of the summer about alcohol and traffic safety and law enforcement and the intersection of all of those. And I know that this conversation today is sort of a follow-on to those, with a highlight particularly on the end of the year here as we enter into the holiday season. We have all of those on our website and on our YouTube channel, and those have been uploaded so you can go back and revisit them. But without more housekeeping, I do want to introduce our moderator today for this conversation, JT Griffin. JT has over 20 years of Capitol Hill and government relations experience. For 8 years, he worked on the Hill as a senior member of the House Appropriations Committee. For over 13 years, he ran the Government Relations and Communications Department at Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And while there, he helped pass laws in over 35 states to improve drunk driving laws and helped advance legislation supporting drunk driving vehicle technologies. In the fall of 2020, JT formed Griffin Strategies, LLC, which is a full-service government relations firm representing clients before the federal government, including the U.S. House of Representatives, the Senate, and various other federal agencies. The firm specializes in issues relating to transportation and technology, the federal appropriations process, and advising nonprofit organizations on fundraising and best practice management. JT, I'm going to toss it over to you to introduce the rest of our panel today and get us started.
Well, thank you very much, Kelly, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm really proud and pleased to be back working again with the Center for Alcohol Policy as we kick off our holiday safety campaign for the end of 2022. It'll be running from now and through the end of the year. And I'm really proud to be here today with several friends that I've been working with for multiple years now, and some new friends as well. And I think the information that we'll hear today will be really helpful. As we're starting this holiday safety campaign, which is new for the center, Kelly and I really wanted to look at what some of our partners in the safety world are doing to promote best practices and great campaigns that go along with the holidays. As most people know who are probably on this webinar, the holiday season is obviously a joyous time, but it can also be a dangerous time. Drunk driving increases on the highway. It's some of the highest numbers of the year around the Christmas holiday, Thanksgiving, and also around the New Year's holiday. But it's not just drunk driving and driving. We also see increases in things like underage drinking, and things like other types of issues and domestic issues associated with alcohol and its misuse. And as Kelly mentioned, it is a unique product, so it does need some unique solutions. So for today's webinar and to kick off this month, which you'll see the center really partnering with some of our great partners across the country. We're looking to support things like NHTSA's Drive Sober, Get Pulled Over campaign, and also with some of our other partners at groups like NABCA and the NLLEA. We're looking to sort of amplify messages. So if you have something that you'd like to share or like for us to share, please feel free to send it to Kelly or myself. And we're looking to be good partners as we try to make sure people have a great holiday and a safe holiday. So with that, I'd like to get us started today on our webinar. Today, we're going to hear from three speakers. We have Stephanie Shaw. Stephanie is with the Office of Safety Recommendations and Communications at the National Transportation Safety Board. Stephanie and I have worked together for a number of years now, and she's one of the old friends. And she's going to talk today about place of last drink and also about the safe systems approach. If you've attended some of our other webinars, you know how important the safe systems approach is to traffic safety moving forward. And the NTSB really has been at the forefront of promoting the safe systems, explaining the safe systems approach. And I think she'll really be able to give a good overview of how this issue of place of last drink, which is falls under the banner of drunk and impaired driving and the NTSB's most wanted list, fits into what we're trying to promote with a safe holiday campaign. Next up will be, after Stephanie, will be Kurt Erickson. Kurt is the president of the Washington Regional Alcohol Program. And if you live in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, also known as the DMV, you have definitely heard of the Sober Ride program. Kurt and I have worked together on drunk driving legislation for years and years, and I'm really proud that pleased that he's able to join us today to talk about his program, which really is, even though it's a local program here in the DC area, it really serves as a national model. And I hope that others in different areas will be able to hear what Kurt's doing and learn from it. And then finally, we're going to hear from Tim Poulin. Tim is the Deputy Director of Maine's Bureau of Alcoholic Beverages and Lottery Operations. And again, if you followed any of our webinars, you know that we've put a big emphasis this year on law enforcement and what we can do to support law enforcement, what are their challenges, and what are some opportunities. And so Tim is working in alcohol law enforcement in Maine, and then he is going to share with us what some of the challenges and opportunities are that he has. So without further ado, we'll start with Stephanie Shaw, who is our first speaker. So Stephanie.
Great. Thanks, JT and Kelly, for the opportunity to be part of this really important conversation and to share a little bit about NTSB's work around alcohol impaired driving and the recommendations that we made. Before I jump into our recommendations, I just want to highlight a few things about the NTSB for anybody that might not be familiar with us. NTSB is an independent federal agency authorized by Congress to investigate every civil aviation accident in the U.S. and select accidents and crashes in other modes of transportation. We determine the probable cause and then issue safety recommendations aimed at preventing future tragedies. In addition, the NTSB also carries out special reports concerning transportation safety issues like impaired driving, and we coordinate the resources of the federal government and other organizations to aid victims and their families when they're impacted by a major transportation disaster. It is important to note that the NTSB has no regulatory action or authority, and we cannot mandate action on our safety recommendations. At the NTSB, we are solely focused on safety. When the NTSB investigates, we take a comprehensive multidisciplinary approach. We look at the role of the people, the vehicles or machines involved, and the operating environment. After our investigations wrap up or our safety reports are released, we then pivot towards advocacy. We don't want our reports and safety recommendations just to sit on a shelf, as we say. We want to see action taken to improve transportation safety. And to accomplish this, one of the tools that we use is our most wanted list of transportation safety improvements. Our most wanted list highlights the improvements needed now to prevent accidents and crashes and reduce injuries and save lives. As you can see, 5 of the safety items on the current list address road safety concerns, including impairment and adoption of the safe system approach. Each of our most wanted list safety items has a set of safety recommendations associated with it, recommendations that we believe when they are implemented will improve safety and save lives. With this list and safety recommendations, we truly hope to spur action needed. When we look at road safety right now, we are facing a public health crisis. On average, we lose 1 road user every 14 minutes, and every minute, an estimated 4 road users are injured. When it comes to alcohol impaired driving, we lose 1 road user every 45 minutes, which means that during the time that we are talking about this issue today, 1 person will likely die in an impaired driving crash. This senseless loss of life will continue unless and until we stop it. I think that's the most important thing that I can pass on today. The simple fact that real lives depend on the work that we all are doing, that real lives are sadly lost and are going to be forever changed by these crashes, and that these crashes are preventable. At the NTSB, we advocate for the adoption of the safe system approach to address the preventable loss of life and serious injuries on the nation's roads. The principles underpinning the safe system approach acknowledge that humans make mistakes that will lead to traffic crashes, but no one should lose their life or be seriously injured as a result of a crash. That the human body has a limited physical ability to tolerate crash forces. Road safety is a shared responsibility, and all parts of the system must be strengthened so that if one part does fail, road users are still protected. Implementing a safe system approach requires a collaborative effort and engagement among a diverse group of stakeholders to ensure that all road users are safe. When it comes to the issue of alcohol impaired driving, I think we can all agree that it will take a safe system approach to see meaningful change. When it comes to alcohol impaired driving, the NTSB has issued more than 100 safety recommendations related to preventing this problem. In 2012, the NTSB's safety advocacy team and staff in our research and engineering office were troubled with the lack of progress being made to address alcohol impaired driving crashes. Despite efforts and looking at the percent of alcohol impaired fatalities relative to all fatalities, you can see that nationally we had reached a definite plateau starting in the mid-90s. And unfortunately, we haven't really made much progress since then. So in 2012 and 2013, we undertook a series of efforts to look at the progress that had been made and where we still needed to go. In May of 2012, the NTSB held a forum, Reaching Zero: Actions to Eliminate Substance Impaired Driving. And we talked with representatives from federal and state governments, public health, advocacy groups, the law enforcement community, and others to identify the most effective and scientifically based countermeasures needed to prevent substance impaired driving. In 2013, we issued a safety report that we call our Reaching Zero report as a result of the forum, and we issued some new recommendations and reiterated others. NTSB's Reaching Zero report includes 19 safety recommendations focused on various impaired driving countermeasures. In this report, we took a broad look at alcohol impaired driving countermeasures to assess what was needed to move the needle. The recommendations focused on general deterrents, such as lowering the BAC limit to 0.05, high visibility enforcement, and vehicle alcohol detection technology. Others focused on addressing specific deterrents of people arrested for DUI, such as ignition interlocks, administrative license actions, and DWI courts. And then another set of recommendations focused on data collection. I'll focus on our place of last drink recommendation, spend a few more minutes describing our rationale for that recommendation. One of the clearest takeaways from the 2012 forum was that we needed better data to allow for a clearer understanding of the problem and the effectiveness of countermeasures, which is why we issued safety recommendations to address this particular problem even before we've issued the final report. So we issued recommendations to address the need for better data through BAC testing and reporting requirements, trying to increase and reach an 80% testing of fatally injured drivers, drug toxicology testing, and then for the collection of place of last drink data. Several panelists at the forum discussed the importance of responsible beverage service with respect to both commercial servers of alcohol and social hosts. At the time, 43 states and DC had dram shop liability laws or case law that imposed civil liability on those individuals, licensed establishments or retailers that sell alcohol to minors or obviously intoxicated adults when the consumer is subsequently involved in an alcohol-related crash that results in death or injury to a third party. These laws provide an incentive for owners of alcohol serving establishments to train their employees in responsible beverage service. The dram shop liability laws, which allow individuals to sue establishments for the drunken behavior of their patrons, have been shown to reduce alcohol-related crashes. Social host liability laws are an extension of dram shop laws and impose civil liability on social hosts who provide alcohol to minors or obviously intoxicated adults in a non-commercial setting. And then when the individual is involved in an alcohol-related crash that results in death or injury. Effective enforcement of criminal and civil provisions of both dram shop and social host liability laws require good data collection. An essential part of any arrest or crash investigation involving an alcohol impaired driver should include an assertive effort by law enforcement officers to determine the location where the impaired driver had been served alcohol. This information is useful to state alcohol regulatory and law enforcement authorities conducting enforcement actions to deter future violations. At the NTSB forum, it was noted that place of last drink data was being used to focus training and enforcement actions on establishments that may be serving alcohol to underage or intoxicated patrons. And at the time, Massachusetts data from 2018 indicated that using place of last drink data to guide compliance and enforcement actions had led to a reduction in driving under the influence arrests associated with establishments that were being targeted for intervention. We believe that increasing the collection of place of last drink data will provide states and law enforcement agencies with information they need to target individuals and establishments that contribute to the problem of alcohol impaired driving, and is likely to serve as a deterrent to serving minors and those who are intoxicated. So we recommended that the states, Puerto Rico and DC, require law enforcement agencies to collect place of last drink data as part of any arrest or crash investigation involving an alcohol impaired driver. We also issued a companion recommendation to the International Association of Chiefs of Police and the National Sheriff's Association to inform their members also of the value of collecting this data. Currently, 11 states have completed the recommended action, and they're shown here in green. 10 states have taken some action, and then there's still 31 states that have taken no action. NTSB's goals with issuing our recommendations, including our recommendation to collect place of last drink data, is to change the conversation around alcohol impaired driving and to move the public to separate their drinking from their driving. We all know that we don't have a silver bullet to prevent alcohol impaired driving. And as we prepare for the upcoming holiday season, where we know that we will unfortunately see an increase in impaired driving, we must take a safe system approach to prevent the deaths and serious injuries on our roads. Road safety is a shared responsibility, and when it comes to preventing impaired driving, responsible alcohol service is part of implementing a safe system and creating a culture of safety. We must leverage every opportunity that we have to intervene so that someone impaired by alcohol does not get behind the wheel. There are many other ways that you can learn about the work of the NTSB and our recommendations related to preventing alcohol impaired driving. And my contact information is here if anyone would like additional information. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. That was great. That was really, really helpful, and some really great information about place of last drink. So we'll let everyone go through with presentations, and then we'll do some questions at the end. And I'll remind for the folks that are viewing, feel free to drop a question in the chat for any of our panelists after we wrap up presentations. So thank you, Stephanie. And next we're going to go to Kurt Erickson with RAP.
Thanks, JT. And actually, thanks, Kelly, too, for both having us on in the center for hosting this format. What both Kelly and JT wanted me to talk about was a little bit about my organization and what it does as an example of what a nonprofit can do in terms of addressing the perils of impaired driving, especially during the holiday season. I actually have just 3 slides, and the last one is a contact one. So these are kind of grouped together, but so is my presentation. So if you're not familiar with us being the Washington Regional Alcohol Program, we're a 40-year-old public-private partnership formed back in 1982, so therefore celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, working to prevent drunk driving and underage drinking in the Washington metropolitan area. So suburban Maryland, the District of Columbia, and then Northern Virginia. We do this through public education, innovative health education programs, and advocacy. But all said and done, if anything, we're probably best known for is a flagship safe ride service that we've done since 1991 called Sober Ride, which I'll mention in a second. But dividing this into 2 umbrellas of what we're focused on specifically during the holiday season. One of the umbrellas is the Drive Sober or Get Pulled Over campaign, which everybody knows that name. It's been a NHTSA branded campaign forever. However, it's new to us. New to us being that RAP serves with our partner in Virginia, the Virginia Highway Safety Office, under the DMV, as the project manager of what was formerly called the Checkpoint Strike Force campaign. So for 20 years, we've had this campaign in play that a number of mid-Atlantic states did, which was twofold. One was an increased deployment of law enforcement to identify and apprehend impaired drivers throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. And then where we came in was managing a public education campaign, trying to prevent drunk driving in the first place by targeting the audience that I think we're all targeting. the 21 to 35-year-old male driver, which I don't think I need to say it on this format, but it's a risk taker entity that's overrepresented in fatal car crashes where alcohol is a factor. It's the highest BAC level in that audience, but it's also a group that's provenly resistant to run-of-the-mill PSAs. And so we really need to make sure we hit the right group with the right message. So newly rebranded this year, Checkpoint Strike Force is now known as Drive Sober and Get Pulled Over. This is our 21st annual offering of this, again, with our DMV partner. That middle photo is a launch event that we did back on September 1st. Virginia has a new governor, and we launched it with him on September 1st. And through earned media efforts alone, this is even before the advertising kicked in, we reached over 8 million persons through 95 television stories and 23 print and online stories across the Commonwealth. But the goals for this aren't reaching people in a numeric way of how many people did we reach, but how actually are we changing behavior? How are we changing awareness? How are we changing, affecting attitudinal change? Since this program started back in 2001, again, called Checkpoint Strike Force then, specific to Virginia, drunk driving crashes have gone down 40%. Drunk driving fatalities have gone down 31%. And drunk driving injuries have been virtually cut in half. They've gone down by 48.5%. Again, targeted for this audience, 21 to 35-year-old males. And this is a campaign that we do a fair amount of testing in. It's not just enough to say that, hey, we think we're hitting the right audience with the right message, but we want to be sure of that. So much so that we annually do a pre and post poll on a pretty sophisticated 600-person outreach, again, to try to measure attitudinal change, awareness change, behavioral change. So we're hitting the right audience with the right message. But we've also done something that was a specific, what's the word I'm looking for? A tech correction back in 2015, which was the result of doing some focus groups, gathering 3 sets of 21 to 35-year-old male drivers in the Baltimore area, in the Northern Virginia area, and the Richmond area, and things that we still respond to from that. This is in addition to the findings that we get on an annual basis from the pre and the post poll, was that this audience universally, didn't matter their race, it didn't matter their socioeconomic level, it didn't matter where they were being represented from geographically. They all said the same thing. They weren't affected by scare tactics. If anything, scare tactics turned them off, and therefore the message was lost. They wanted to not be told that they're part of the problem, but to tell them how they can be part of the solution. And they didn't object to humor as a means of communicating this type of information. And so we made a pivot back in 2015 that's evident in all of our ads since then, that it's been a very carrot versus stick approach. In fact, the campaign now for the last 4 years has been called, actually a subtitle is called Act Like It, that if you're old enough to drink, to act like it. We wanted people to get a safe ride home. You know, the dichotomy was, and the most recent data that we have is a poll that we did in July and August of this year that said that 93%, let me make sure I have the right number, 93% of our audience believe it's very important to make us plan a safe ride home before a night of drinking, but only 43% regularly do. That's an issue. Compound that with the fact that the majority of these 21, 35-year-olds, 86% specifically, have driven after a few drinks or been driven by someone who had a few drinks. We really needed to make sure that our message was resounding. To that end, for the last 4 years, our campaign theme, again, has been Act Like It. And what we've tried to do is to, whether you're in a bar situation, which is what our first ads were for the first couple of years, or during COVID when people weren't going to bars, to show what could happen if you're at home and you decide to go out after drinking. And then lastly, this year is our audience leaving a bar and how they can possibly get a safe ride home. In all of these cases, we've introduced the horribly sexist, but yet demonstrably effective man baby character, which is that one person in your group, and again, we're targeting 21, 35-year-old men, but the one person in the group that hasn't planned ahead, that hasn't planned a safe ride home, that hasn't exercised, you know, getting a safe ride there, using public transportation, using cabs, using rideshare, or what have you. And that's the message that we have playing right now. So we actually do these ads that we pay almost $1 million a year just to run these ads in the Labor Day period, and then again we'll be ramping back up in December. And Kelly, if I can get you to play ahead. So again, the arc of the messages have been, we've talked about if you're in a bar, what you need to do to get home safely. If you're at home and you go out after drinking during the COVID era, but now we're focusing on our characters, including a man baby leaving the bar and doing the right thing. So if you could play that, Kelly.
Okay, our ride's on its way.
Not for me. I'm driving.
No, Jake, no driving. You've been drinking.
I'm driving home.
Everything all right here? Yes, sir. Just waiting on a ride.
He's waiting. I'm good to drive.
Ignore him. Oh, there's our ride. Appreciate your concern, officer.
Good choice. You gentlemen have a good night.
Again, still incorporating law enforcement, but a demonstrative carrot versus stick approach, something that's been effective since we've had this campaign. For the first couple of years after our focus groups in 2015, the campaign was called Beautiful, and now it's called Act Like It. And again, in addition to the longer longitudinal numbers that I mentioned before, in terms of downward trending DUI incidents, each year measurable movements that we're making in terms of increased awareness of the campaign, increased behavioral change, specifically people designating a sober driver, people specifically using rideshare, which is the biggest change that they're engaged in. And then knowledge of the issue and knowledge of increased law enforcement. Again, we're doing the public education campaign. While we're doing this, law enforcement is ramping up their efforts. And so that our target audience knows that they're going to be out there in force, and that their probability of being stopped at a sobriety checkpoint or a saturation patrol is great. We're hoping that that has the behavioral changes as it's intended. Kelly, if I can get you to go to the next slide. You can just pop all those three up there. So for the holiday campaign, even though that campaign goes during the Labor Day holiday and through the winter holidays, the other part of the holiday campaign for us is there's three different initiatives that we've done now for a long time basis. I'm not going to go in the order that I think are up there, but one of them is the far right emblem that you see, which is the Maryland Remembers campaign. So I mentioned our Virginia partner. Our Maryland partner is the Maryland Highway Safety Office. And with them for the last 19 years, we've coordinated a ceremony called Maryland Remembers, which is an effort every November or December, depending on where it falls, where we both memorialize the state's victims of drunk driving while at the same time calling for safety during, as JT said, the dangerous winter holidays. This year's event is no different than recent years, where we're featuring again the involvement of Maryland Governor Larry Hogan. And when we have the involvement at the governor level with either this campaign or the Drive Sober Get Pulled Over campaign, it does allow us to use a taller soapbox to try to reach as many people as we can. This year's event is actually scheduled for next Monday. It's in Annapolis. It's at 4 p.m. And again, it's a wonderful amalgam of both victims of drunk driving and law enforcement that are participants in this effort. And in terms of, again, memorializing victims of drunk driving and calling for safety. The far left emblem is our own law enforcement awards. That's something that I think a lot of you probably on this webinar either are exposed to, or maybe you conduct yourselves. We make a point, however, of doing our law enforcement awards specifically in the middle of the holiday season, because we use it to kick off our overall holiday campaign. So JT mentioned that the center was kicking off their campaign. Our campaign will kick off on December 16th with this event. It's a 25th annual event. It's our largest annual event. It features NBC reporter as an MC, our local congressman, other speakers. It's scheduled for December 16th. More importantly, it is an opportunity to thank the men and women in uniform that serve as the front lines on these efforts. Again, I mentioned earlier that we do public education work. We do innovative health education programs and advocacy. And as good as we think we might be in any of those efforts, it pales in comparison to the front lines of uniformed personnel that are literally putting their lives on the line to identify and apprehend drunk drivers, as they will step up to do greatly during the holiday season. So this is a wonderful opportunity to do that. And then lastly, that middle emblem is what we also kick off that day. So again, I mentioned the fact we do all these programs, we have law enforcement awards, and as good as all of those things might be, you still need to have some type of safety valve to these high risk, high alcohol consumption periods. And so for 5 holidays a year, which for us includes St. Patrick's Day, Cinco de Mayo, Independence Day, Halloween, which we just wrapped up a couple weeks ago, And then the winter holidays that whatever we can afford to do between basically the middle of middle of December up through and including New Year's Eve. And what we do specifically on these holidays is something that we've done since 1991, which is to offer, as I appreciate what JT said, a model free safe ride service to prevent DUI. We do it through a partner with Lyft. We used to do this with cab companies, but in 2017, we hitched our wagon to Lyft. And we made sure that, again, we were using the means of getting home that this target audience of 21, 35-year-olds are used to doing. And what we do specifically is to make Lyft available during those holidays, that if you're 21 years of age or older in the greater Washington area, which is 7 different localities, you can go to an app, you can download our Sober Ride code from a website, put it into your app, and get up to a $15 ride home. The fact of the matter is the average fare for this program is actually under $15. So it really does capture the majority of fares. Since we started this program 31 years ago, we've had over 83,000. In fact, the exact number is 83,678 free safe rides home to would-be drunk drivers in the greater Washington area. It's always a double-edged sword in the fact that, we've institutionalized this program. So I think that people think that it's always going to be available and it's got to be some faceless big government behemoth behind it, when in fact, it's actually a 3-person charitable organization that annually strokes a check of about $60,000 just for fares alone to keep this program going. I bring this up because we are still committed to this program, and we're still seeing life in it that surprises us in a pleasant way. When we shifted to Lyft versus a cab paradigm in 2017 during a share economy mode, we had our ridership more than triple. For the Halloween campaign that we just had, and again, keep in mind, it's a 31-year campaign. You wouldn't expect to see your ridership. You would expect to see it like Stephanie's graph that she had before of DUI as just going downward, when in fact our ridership is only increasing. For Halloween, just 2 weeks ago, we had almost 1,000 people utilize our program just on one given night. 943 persons used it, which was the second highest level of ridership in Sober Ride's 31-year history. In fact, if you do the math between the 12 hours that we offered the program, 943 riders is basically translating into the removal of a would-be drunk driver off our shared roadways every 45 seconds. We do this without ad dollars. We have no ad dollars that we throw at this. We're relying specifically on earned media and some materials that we produce. But it is a local and life-saving campaign. The DC area is pretty consistently below the national percentage of which all traffic fatalities involve drunk drivers. I'm not positioning Sober Ride to take credit for it, but at the same point, when you've taken off the roadways almost 84,000 drunk drivers, it's certainly having an impact. So, and next slide, lastly, I'm just watching my time, so I don't want to run over. So as Stephanie did, that's my contact information. We're not wrapping up here. We still have one more speaker, but more than happy. We've certainly served as a consult on a number of other entities that have started this program, specifically and most recently in Delaware, where they have, and I should have wrote down the names of the Sober Lyft. And then in Hampton Roads section of Virginia, they also have a Sober Ride campaign that we help consulting with. It's always great not to have to reinvent the wheel, to the extent that we can help our traffic safety brethren not make the same mistakes we have, or to share materials that we can do. We're at your disposal. JT, thank you.
Well, Kurt, thank you very much. That was fantastic. And I didn't realize 83,000, almost 84,000 free rides home since the program has begun. I think you definitely are making an impact in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And on behalf of everyone in the area, thank you for doing that. That's amazing. That's a huge number. And so finally, our last speaker is Tim Poulin, and Tim is going to talk to us a little bit about a program that he's working on in Maine, and about how his efforts are impacting alcohol law enforcement and what the current state of law enforcement is. So Tim, take it away.
Thanks, JT. Thank you for having me today, and to Kelly and the Center for hosting this webinar. So Maine, we've been a state for 202 years. Thought I'd throw that in. We celebrated our bicentennial during the COVID, which means we didn't, which was unfortunate because there were some nice things planned for us here in the Pine Tree State. So I've been responsible for liquor licensing enforcement now for 8 years. I've been here at the Bureau for 12. Our history of liquor enforcement was robust up until about 20 years ago when basically the program was defunded and we lost all law enforcement capabilities for enforcing Maine's liquor laws. And we've struggled ever since. They converted the almost 20 sworn officers to 5 civil inspectors. We have no criminal authority under the liquor laws, and we only have administrative authority over our licensees, which, while that's important, it's not enough, to move the needle in terms of managing the number of licensees that we have and the activities associated with those licensees. And so through the help of NABCA, the National Alcohol Beverage Control Association, we secured some grant funding to do this assessment, and basically to look at where Maine stood compared to our sister states around the United States. So in the survey that we conducted, we had 45 states and included the District of Columbia, 4 counties in Hawaii, yes, 4 in Hawaii, and it's very comprehensive. It's the first of its kind in recent memory, and we are hoping to be able to take the results of this study and assessment and take it to policymakers here in Maine to say, we appreciate that there's a cost associated with having full-time employees do this work, but it's important work. And what we don't want to happen here in Maine is something catastrophic happen because we weren't paying attention. And when I say we're not paying attention is, so if you think about the state of Maine, we're at kind of the end of the road here in New England, but we have, we currently had, for most part of 20 years, we had 5 persons to cover the entire state. Through a supplemental budget request to the governor and the legislature, we added 2 more inspectors. So we now have, we have 7 in total. But for the most part, during this last 20 years, it's been 5 folks to cover the entire state. And that's just not possible to do. If we think about the territory kind of in the middle of the state north, we have more square miles to cover than the state of New Hampshire and Vermont combined. And those 2 states have more law enforcement than we have, and they actually have sworn officers. So it's a struggle. We have a lot of windshield time. We have remote locations, and Maine is not unique in that regard. We have probably many states that have rural locations and remote locations that require some other mode of transportation other than a motor vehicle to get to the licensee. In the wintertime, sometimes that means, snowmobiles or ice skates, depending on where you're going to be. And so this study and this assessment has been important to us because we feel like, the legislature and policymakers want to help our small business folks who are in the alcohol industry to be able to be good business folks in the state and be successful at it. We want that too, but at the same time, you have, it's that traditional thing, it's the 10% of all your licensees that are the problem, and then another 1% of those 10% that are the ones that are the bad players. And I think that what we've seen mostly is that our industry here in the state wants us to be more proactive in what we do, but you can't do that with 5 to 7 people. It's just not possible. And so what we found in this assessment initially is that if you look at our total number of staff that are here at the Division of Liquor Licensing and Enforcement, we have 17. And if you divide that by the number of licensees that we have, it's about 600 and something per full-time employee. But then when you break it down to just folks responsible for dealing with our licensees directly and enforcing the laws, we're talking around 1,600, which per licensee, and that's an average, and that is the 4th highest in the country. There's only 3 other states that have a higher threshold than Maine. And just for an example, coastal Maine from around this, if you've ever been to Maine, the city of Portland, which is our largest municipality with over 60,000 residents, but that corridor that comes from the border with New Hampshire and runs up about an hour north of Poland, one inspector has responsibility for over 2,300 licensees. That's establishments, not the number of licenses that are there. That's the number of establishments. The city of Portland itself has over 500 licensees. For one person to manage that is not practical. And quite frankly, we respond on complaints because we just don't have enough time to visit every one of those establishments when they're due for a renewal. It's just, we just don't have the capacity. Then you layer on the work that we must undertake in managing direct-to-consumer shipping of wine. We have over 620 licensees in that regard. And when the legislature imposed that, they said, no, it's just to help the in-state wineries to be able to do that. We have around 60 in-state wineries in the state, and only 2 actually participate in direct-to-consumer shipping outside of Maine or in Maine. So here's some of the challenges: increasing number of licensees, even with COVID, those numbers have increased. The possibility of tainted alcohol, believe it or not, Maine has a lot of moonshining activity, I suspect, and that can be problematic. E-commerce platforms are growing up around us, and that puts challenges on our ability to manage that. New products, we've had some of them in the past, hard soda, like Not Your Father's Root Beer was popular a few years back. Now we see that, hard Mountain Dew is coming into the marketplace. And so that's blurring where those categories, how they're going to be marketed in the stores. If you have folks that like Mountain Dew, especially if they're not of legal drinking age, are they going to have access to that? And then, of course, home delivery. Maine law doesn't permit it unless the licensee is making that delivery, whether it's an on-premise or an off-premise. But still, we have those challenges of the right things happening when those, when that alcohol is delivered to that home. Even though during, COVID, we allowed, curbside delivery, those types of things, cocktails to go from on-premise. And the legislature, has put in a piece of legislation to make that permanent. And when they were considering that earlier this year, we had a legislature on our oversight committee asked the question of us, well, what have we found? Has there been any problems? And our answer is, we don't know, because we don't have the capacity to manage that. And so they've delayed making it permanent for another 3 years, but it's likely to become permanent. But that's the challenges that we have, is that, again, our policymakers are trying to do the right thing for their constituents. And we're trying to do the right thing for our constituents, is to make sure that we create that level playing field where everybody's playing by the same rules. And then, of course, COVID-19 just threw in addition to the things that we allowed licensees to do, just made it more difficult for everyone to function in the normal course of business, and required, us to try to manage things differently. Here in Maine, we're very limited in our automation. Everything mostly receives on paper. So our staff had to be in the office full time to manage what was going on. And there was lots of activity, of course. And as I talked about here about our struggles with, having enough folks to manage what we have here in terms of the marketplace and our licensee count, you can see here that we've had a 20-year span of not being able to keep up with the demand. And there's been new, as I mentioned, direct-to-consumer shipping back in 2009 of wine, changes in local manufacturing, exceptions to the 3-tier system, all of that is intended to help our in-state manufacturers compete in the marketplace, which that's important. We get that, fundamentally, but we also get that, when the legislature imposes these new laws that require our oversight, it makes it more difficult for us to do that, which means that things, we have to prioritize what we do. And prioritizing keeping people in business and getting them in business, especially in a state that relies on tourism a lot. We have a lot of seasonal accounts that open up, for the summertime or the wintertime, as the case may be, in those spots where either winter or summer activities are important to that to the economy. Some of our preliminary findings show that across the United States, there's 450,000 licensed locations around the country, and you can see the breakdown here. 350 on-premise and 210,000 off-premise. That's a lot of licensees. Here in Maine, we have around 4,800 locations in the state, but a lot of those have multiple licenses depending on a number of things here. And so, and as I talked about a little bit ago, for nationally, you'll see that there's one full-time equivalent per 22 establishments and one FTE per 1,700 establishments. That's the range. Here in Maine, as I spoke about early on, for all 17 employees, it's a 672 count. It gets larger at over 1,600 when you just talk about the 7 inspectors that we have that cover the state. And so this is we knew this was a problem for us, but to actually see this as we conducted the surveys of the 45 jurisdictions, just to see that we have these issues. Utah is the only state that we could find that actually has in statute a ratio in statute. The annual report in Arizona stated something, made a reference to it. And you can see here in this slide, there are some population standards set in place. We have that here in Maine for our agency liquor stores. So Maine is a control state for the sale and distribution of spirits. So we're like New Hampshire and Vermont. New Hampshire has its state-run stores. Here in Maine, we don't have state-run stores, so we license private businesses to sell spirits on our behalf, but that's the number of licenses available is a population threshold set by statute. And then you can see that there are 4 other states that have population densities based on the number of outlets that are available as well, based on the population of that. Kelly, if you can go to the next slide. This graphic shows where complaints come from, and and you can see this. Mostly our complaints come from either other agencies or the public. Our routine inspections, we do very limited of those. Most of those are on brand new establishments that are getting open for operation, and so it's difficult for us to manage complaints other than when we get them, or we're doing an inspection of a place that we haven't been to in a while, and we find problems that we have to then further investigate. But it's not a good way to manage our licensees is by hoping that they stay in compliance. Trust but verify. Kelly, the next slide, please. Again, this just shows the density of where our licensees are across the threshold, and this is, you can see the most part are in densely populated areas, but it's a pretty even across the board in terms of some of that. But these are the challenges we face from having lots of licensees in one area to them spread out in wide ranges of areas of the state and the drive time needed. You can go to the next slide, please. Or maybe that's it. I guess that was it. And some, I think it's, as Kelly shared early on, our motto is unfortunately been we're doing less with less. We can't keep up with the demand of the marketplace, but Maine isn't unique to this problem. Our colleagues for example, in New York State, they have 50,000 licensees, and they have 30 agents. That's still probably not enough to cover that threshold. So, I don't want to sound like we're whining here about our abilities, but we are. And this is we don't intend this to be anything negative against our policymakers here in the state. It's just we're trying to make them aware of the situation that we're in, and the ability for us to adequately manage what they want us to do which is to provide a forum for which these businesses can thrive in the alcohol industry. And that's what we're trying to accomplish, at the same time holding all of our licensees accountable to be in compliance with the laws. Whether they're good laws or not good laws, they are the laws, and that's what we must enforce. And so again, in this capacity report will help every jurisdiction understand where they stand against the rest of the nation and help them and their policymakers decide, is the threshold of what they have for the number of full-time employees dedicated to the enforcement of liquor laws sufficient to protect the public safety of their state.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. That was great. So at this time, if we'll keep an eye on the Q&A. I know there's been a few questions that have popped up that either Kelly or myself have answered. So if you have any questions for the panel, please let us know. And in the meantime, I wanted to start out with just a couple questions for our panelists, and I know we're running up to the hour here, but lots of good information here. So. Tim, one question that just kind of came to mind as we were chatting, you had mentioned where the legislature had reacted to sort of the alcohol delivery, alcohol to go type of legislation, where they, instead of making it permanent, they've kind of sunsetted that, I guess, in 3 years, and then your thought would be they might make it permanent in 3 years. That's something that we've done some work on with the center, making sure that lawmakers are informed and making good decisions about whether or not to allow those types of laws to move forward. So, based on what you know now, do you have any recommendations, or what do you lean towards advice for lawmakers, policymakers, thought leaders who are considering those types of legislation?
And again, it goes back to, other than a couple of places that we discovered, so it's funny in a strange way. A couple of different on-premise establishments were being interviewed by local TV stations about, do they want cocktails to go to be made permanent? And watching the video of that, I noticed, the back bar refrigerator, I could tell they had, ready-made cocktails to go. And under Maine law, it's very restrictive on, you can't really pre-make them well in advance. They have to be made up for immediate use. And so what we're concerned about, of course, is that our licensees aren't following the letter of the law, which is you make them the day and you sell them the day. If not, then you get rid of them. And so 2 particular licensees that we looked at, we issued them summonses for violating the law because they had weeks worth of cocktails to go pre-made, which was a violation of the law. And so I think they had to request to be added to our list of approved ones. So I think we have like 350 on-premise establishments that have requested that they be allowed to do that, which they've been approved. That means that we got to have the capacity to go out and periodically check to make sure that they are in compliance. And when you add that to everything else we have going on, it falls down the priority list, unfortunately.
Okay. That's really helpful. And so just to sort of follow up on that, Stephanie talked quite a bit about place of last drink, and I really see sort of a synergy between her presentation and then sort of your agency, where you're actually charged with enforcing the laws. So how might place of last drink be helpful in Maine? How might that be a helpful policy to your agency? Tim?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that
That's
was
okay.
I'm sorry. I thought that was for Stephanie. I'm sorry. Please.
That's okay. I was just saying, and sorry to pick on you, but I just was noticing it's such a synergy between her presentation on place of last drink and your agency, and sort of where the rubber meets the road. So how could place of last drink be helpful information for your agency in enforcing alcohol laws?
Absolutely critical, again, here in Maine, because we don't have the authority over criminal activity at licensed establishments. We rely on local law enforcement. We have agreements with about 107 to 112 local law enforcement agencies around the state, but we depend on them to give us information about what's happening in their municipalities. Sometimes we see it, we read an article in the newspaper about it, or we hear a news blip about it. City of Portland, our biggest municipality, is very good at staying in touch with us about things that happen in their municipalities, but not every municipality does that. And so oftentimes when something happens bad, we're brought in way late in the process, and they either haven't done that work to find out where the last place of service occurred, which means then, sometimes we've had a situation where the incident happened 3 years ago and folks aren't around now that, can provide us that information. And so it is critical that we'd have that, but we don't have a repository established to collect that information, and whether or not these agencies, even though they're required, it sounds like they're required by federal code to do that, whether they do that or not, we don't know that. And of course, we don't have authority over them for that. But ultimately, it's always key to have more information to help us do our jobs better. But ultimately, we rely on those local law enforcement to do that work because of our lack of criminal authority in these areas.
Hey, JT, I would add that the place of last drink is but one indicia of traceability that's really required. And it's coming to light in terms of the third-party delivery of alcohol, so that you can make sure that you have the adequate compliance data. I mean, place of last drink has always been a double-edged sword where, in one aspect, somebody might not, throw under their bus their favorite watering hole, or where perhaps they're regularly being overserved. That issue aside, it does allow ABC or some entity to investigate if a place of last drink is coming up consistently in DUI arrests. Same thing with the delivery of alcohol. If one of the third-party delivery agents is constantly being cited as a means by which underage persons are getting alcohol, that traceability data it weaves into the compliance data. And you had mentioned the sunset provision. I think that's key as well. That's something that Virginia's just did for the next 2 years, which gives any state the ability to collect that compliance data and find out, is it working, and what's not working. I mean, they have a third-party licensure situation, and that's great because then you have some teeth into the license, but you need to be able to exercise that if somebody's really falling out of compliance.
Right. And we are running up on the hour, and I wanted to get a quick question into Stephanie and Kurt, one quick one to you. So if you could rapid fire responses. Stephanie, so obviously place of last drink is one of the recommendations, and you mentioned the NTSB report on impaired driving, and I would definitely recommend for folks on the webinar to go on your website and check out that report, because there's a lot of good information on that. And I remember working quite a bit with NTSB on that a long time ago now. So you mentioned there were 10 states that have taken some action towards place of last drink. 11 states have place of last drink laws. How would you recommend states that are interested and to policymakers who are interested in this issue, how should they move forward with that?
Sure. So I think, one thing that we would like to see is just that it be expanded beyond just arrest reports, that it actually be included as part of investigations for fatal crash reports as well. So in a lot of states, they collect that data for arrests, but it doesn't carry over into their fatal crash reporting. So we'd like to see that expanded. The other thing is requiring the collection. So a lot of states do collect it. Some communities within the state, law enforcement within the state collect it, but it's not a requirement across the entire state. So we'd really like to see it be, expanded across those states. The interesting thing about this particular data collection is that it doesn't require legislative change. So it's really just that it become a priority for law enforcement as they're doing their investigations. And then, of course, data collection is great, but then using it and having it accessible to the people that need it to carry out those enforcement measures for places like what we said are over serving, or where we know the people are, coming out of those establishments and being involved in crashes.
That's great. And then finally, Kurt, for you, for areas that are looking or interested in creating a program similar to Sober Ride, what advice would you have for them looking to create sort of a life-saving program like what you've done?
that the starting it is the toughest part. It's getting it off the ground, but it's not necessarily a prerequisite is not necessarily government funding. We love our government supporters for this, but quite frankly, this program existed for a couple decades before we were able to tie government funding in it. And keep in mind that we get government funding for the things that we do. So it doesn't have to be that traditional model of government funding, but government seeded money to get things going can be great. To us, it's throwing the biggest net out there of partners, that Venn diagram of, transportation partners, business partners, hospitality partners, and getting that, where they all overlap to be the nucleus of a program like this, funding and other resource-wise.
That's terrific. So, Kelly, I don't know how we want to do this. Normally, we do a 3 key takeaways. Do we want to have everyone go around and give their takeaway, and then you wrap us up? Does that work? Or
sounds good to me. Let's go around the horn as we did in order of presentation. So Stephanie, have you go first, followed by Kurt, and have Tim play us out.
Sure. So I think biggest takeaway from us is just that, we are aimed and trying to get people to separate their drinking from their driving, and whatever opportunity we have to intervene before someone who's been consuming alcohol, before they make the decision to get behind the wheel, I think we should be looking for those opportunities and looking for those non-traditional partners or unique partnerships to make that reality.
And Stephanie actually took mine as part of her presentation when she said that all drunk driving incidents are 100% preventable, which I cannot underscore. So let me take the other cliche, which is that you hear that your best defense against a drunk driver is wearing a seatbelt, but the real bottom line is that the routine wearing of seatbelts is actually the single most effective measure to reduce crash-related deaths and injuries. So if you do anything this holiday season, buckle up.
Tim?
And finally, our motto, doing less with less. I think the takeaway here is that all of our sister states around here in this country need more support from policymakers to understand that what the right ratio is for their state in terms of the number of full-time equivalent employees that are dedicated to compliance and enforcement of liquor laws, and Maine is no different from that, and our assessment will help underscore that for not only Maine, but many other jurisdictions in the US.
Thank you, Tim, Stephanie, and Kurt, all of you. It's been really wonderful to hear from you, sort of those issues that we're seeing both upstream and downstream here in the holiday season and keeping our roads safe. Like you said, Kurt and Stephanie, you came up with the same takeaway before you even knew it, of all of these drunk driving incidents are preventable, absolutely 100%. And then that education perspective and being able to trace back and find where those issues are taking place in the outlet itself, or perhaps where are some hot spot areas that we should be paying attention to with Tim's perspective from alcohol law enforcement. I do really appreciate all of your time as panelists, and thank you to everyone who's also been able to join us. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are recording this webinar, so we'll be sure to put this up on YouTube in the coming week. And included in that will we'll have a link to all slides and contact information for our panelists as well. So any follow-up, I'm sure they would love to serve as a resource, and I think we're all excited to see Tim's report published in, hopefully, I don't want to put a timeline on you, but hopefully coming weeks, or we'll say month or so. But looking forward to that, and thank you to everyone, and we're excited to continue to bring you more resources as we talk about holiday traffic safety. And thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you soon.